There are 10,000 ways to die in the 41st millennium, but few so horrifying as being chosen by a hive fleet. To live beneath such a sky is to know despair on a scale that words cannot capture. Imagine, if you will, the heavens above your world split by living leviathans, bioships the size of mountains gliding in perfect, silent formation. They do not roar or thunder, they simply blot out the stars, as if the galaxy itself has chosen to abandon you. I speak now in the voice of the storyteller, for this is no single soldier's tale, but the fate of entire worlds. And this world, once home to billions, will not see another sunrise when the Hive Fleet descends. The first sign was the blackout. Vox traffic grew garbled, astropaths fell screaming into silence, and Auspex readings flooded with impossible life signs beyond orbit. The Imperial Guard regiments stationed here, veterans of hive wars, orc campaigns, and worse, steadied themselves as best they could. Trenches were dug, choke points fortified, and titans awakened from their hangars. They were professional soldiers, hardened by decades of bloodshed, and they moved with a precision born of grim necessity. But nothing could prepare them for what hung above. Tyranid hive ships do not simply arrive, they eclipse the sky. Their tendrils writhed in void space, and their bioplasma launchers glowed like the eyes of predators. Even the most stalwart commissars struggled to silence the whispers of fear. For when you see the swarm descending, you do not think of victory. You think only of how long you can hold. The planet itself seemed to sense the predator's approach. The winds shifted unnaturally, flocks of birds wheeled in chaotic flight, and the oceans grew strangely still. Within the hive cities, civilians pressed against barricades, clutching at relics of the Emperor, praying to a god who may or may not hear them across the immaterium. In orbit, the Imperial Navy fought valiantly, their macro cannon fire and lance batteries lashing out into the void. They struck true, burning chunks of alien chitin into nothingness. But the swarm adapted, shifting, absorbing, pressing forward. On the ground, commanders barked orders with mechanical efficiency. Lasgun power packs were checked and rechecked, Vox networks triangulated, and Auspex readings calibrated against the swarm. The Guard were competent, they were loyal. And yet, deep down, every man and woman knew this truth. The Tyranids were not an army to be beaten. They were hunger incarnate. Still, the order came. Hold the line. And so they did, as the first shadow fell across the trenches, and the air itself seemed to shiver with the incoming tide of claws and teeth. The first wave struck like a living storm. From the skies, spore pods rained down in a deluge of fire and ichor, slamming into the earth with bone-shattering force. They split open in showers of acidic mist, disgorging creatures bred for nothing but slaughter. Termaguns poured out by the hundreds, their flesh rifles fused to their arms, shrieking with a sound that was not born of lungs, but of alien resonance. Behind them came the lumbering carnifexes, living battering rams that tore through barricades as if they were paper. The Imperial Guard met them with fire and fury. Lasguns snapped in relentless volleys, creating a red-lit wall of death across the trenches. Heavy bolters thundered, tearing swathes of gaunts apart in bloody ruin. Lemon Russ battle tanks advanced in formation, their turrets spewing shells that reduced clusters of Tyranids to molten gore. Commissars stood atop the parapets, bolt pistols barking, their voices cutting through the cacophony with sermons of the Emperor's wrath. For a moment, it worked. The front line held. Tyranids died in their thousands. The Guard fought with the mechanical rhythm of those who had drilled for this very hour. Orders passed swiftly along the Vox, artillery coordinates updated with brutal efficiency, basilisk guns launching high arching shells that turned landing zones into firestorms. But the swarm was endless. For every Tyranid that fell, 2 more clambered over the carcasses. The ground itself became a shifting carpet of chitin and flesh, advancing inexorably. Guardsmen reloaded until their hands bled. Gunners kept barrels hot until smoke poured from weapon housings, and still the wave pressed closer. The first collapse came at Hill 39. A mycetic spore cracked open, and from its depths emerged a Tyranid warrior, towering above the gaunts, directing their movement with a psychic shriek that rattled bones. Guardsmen broke beneath its presence, and within minutes the line was overrun. Commissar Halthan drew his chainsword, rallying the survivors into a countercharge, and for a heartbeat it seemed he might stem the tide. His blade roared, cutting through gaunts in sprays of ichor, until the warrior's talons speared him through. His death cry was lost in the din, but his stand bought precious seconds for others to fall back. From orbit, Navy captains saw the surface battles raging and moved to intervene. Strafing runs of marauder bombers scorched vast swathes of Tyranid ranks, their payloads turning the earth into a burning wasteland. Yet even this came at a cost. Gargoyles, winged bioforms swarmed upward, tearing bombers from the sky with razor-sharp talons. Pilots screamed over Vox before their signals cut to static. And still, the swarm pressed on. In the command bunkers, generals adjusted maps with grim precision. Every lost trench, every broken hill was marked in red. There was no panic, only the slow, grinding realization that they could not outlast this tide. By nightfall, the first wave had not ended. It had only thickened, grown denser, more relentless. Exhausted guardsmen slumped behind sandbags, firing blindly into the dark as bioluminescent alien eyes blinked back at them. Medicae tents overflowed, screams rising as surgeons worked without rest, amputating limbs blackened by alien toxins. Still with us in the darkness? Hit that like button if this tale chills your soul. And as the second dawn broke, the Tyranids adapted. Their next assault would not be brute force alone. It would be evolution given form.
At dawn, the war changed. The trenches that had survived the night were little more than graveyards, walls slick with ichor and bodies stacked like cordwood. Guardsmen who had endured the endless first wave reloaded in silence, their eyes hollow. Yet they stood ready, for to falter meant annihilation. Then the earth itself betrayed them. The Tyranids no longer came only from the skies. The swarm had seeded the planet, and now its roots burrowed deep. Massive capillary towers erupted from the soil like obscene, pulsing trees, their trunks grown of bone and sinew. They stretched toward the heavens, linking with the tendrils of orbiting hive ships. The planet began to bleed. With every tower that rose, the land grew thinner. The oceans receded as if drained by some vast, unseen thirst. Forests withered into ash, fields collapsed into sinkholes, and the air filled with a choking stench of ammonia and alien musk. Civilians fled deeper into fortress cities, but even there the walls groaned as Tyranid digestion pools boiled beneath the streets. The guard fought valiantly. Engineers rigged charges, detonating capillary towers with earthshaker rounds and crack missiles. For a moment, victory seemed possible, until the towers regrew. Within hours, the same grotesque structures stood again, stronger, thicker, pulsing with greater vigor. The swarm adapted faster than human ingenuity could counter. And then came the second tide. This was not a horde of gaunts and beasts. This was the harvest. Ripper swarms, countless and ravenous, spread across the battlefield like living floods. They devoured everything, corpses, rubble, even the wounded still clinging to life. Flamers roared in defiance, burning swaths of the creatures, but for every swarm destroyed, 10 more followed. Artillery pounded relentlessly. Earthshaker cannons shook the skies, and basilisks thundered through the night. The guard were competent, their discipline unyielding, even as comrades fell. At Ridgepoint Bastion, Captain Jorel orchestrated a perfect retreat, leapfrogging platoons to preserve cohesion under impossible pressure. His orders were crisp, his resolve iron, but even his brilliance was only a slowing of the inevitable. The planet itself screamed. As the bioships fed, clouds thickened into a choking haze. Rain fell not as water, but as a slick, corrosive mist. Rivers turned black, their currents sluggish with alien enzymes. Wildlife twisted, mutating into mindless predators before being devoured by the swarm. Even the sacred cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy cracked, their marble stained with Tyranid ichor. In orbit, the Navy still fought, but their numbers dwindled. Each victory against a hive ship was met with fresh reinforcements vomited forth from the void. The swarm was not a fleet. It was a force of nature. On the surface, the guard realized the truth. They were not defending a planet. They were defending a corpse being devoured in slow, agonizing gulps. Comment your theories below. What corruption stalks our heroes? The flesh tides would not stop until every resource, every scrap of biomass was consumed. And though the guard stood ready, bolters hot and bayonets fixed, there were whispers now. Whispers that survival was no longer possible, that all that remained was how long they could delay the inevitable.
By the 4th week, there was no day or night, only the shadow of the swarm.
The world was choking on alien growth. Capillary towers pulsed in every direction, linking ground to orbit in obscene vascular networks. Digestion pools bubbled across what had once been farmland, their acidic slurry dissolving corpses, tanks, even hab blocks dragged into their depths. The planet was being undone, stripped molecule by molecule. And yet, amid the decay, one fortress remained. Hive City Corallan, the last bastion. Its spires pierced the poison sky, its walls bristling with macro cannon, last turrets, and missile silos. Inside, the last regiments of the Astra Militarum gathered with civilians who had survived the first cull. It was here that Lord General Strauss convened his staff. His voice was hoarse from weeks of command, but his eyes were unflinching. We hold until the Navy extracts. We hold because the Emperor wills it. And if the Emperor wills our deaths, then let them be deaths remembered. Orders went out. Every guardsman capable of standing was pressed to the line. The streets became kill zones, choke points barricaded with rubble and burning promethium. Tech priests blessed autocannons and rewired defense grids with manic fervor. Even the Scola Progenium orphans carried ammunition. Everyone had a role. The Tyranids came in waves that defied comprehension. Hive tyrants strode across the horizon, their psychic roars cracking stone and shattering the sanity of the weak-willed. Biovores spat spore mines that rolled through barricades, detonating in showers of bone shards. The very air grew toxic, thick with spores that clawed at lungs and eyes. And yet, the bastion held. It held because the guard fought like machines, every volley precise, every artillery strike timed to the heartbeat. At Gate 6, an entire company of Cadians stood shoulder to shoulder, their lasguns firing in perfect sequence, mowing down charging hormagaunts by the thousands. Commissar Renan paced behind them, bolt pistol in hand, his presence keeping fear at bay. Not a single guardsman broke formation. Above, the skies lit with desperate heroics. Marauder bombers made strafing runs so low their wings clipped capillary towers, releasing payloads of incendiary hellfire. Navy captains threw their frigates into suicide charges, ramming Tyranid cruisers to buy seconds more for the bastion. The void burned, but still the hive ships loomed. Then the extraction order came. A battered voxcaster crackled in the command chamber. The Navy had cleared a corridor, thin, fragile, but real. Dropships would descend to Corallan's upper spires and evacuate as many as possible. Cheers rang out in the bunker, brief and hollow, for everyone knew the truth. Not all would leave. The last bastion became a slaughterhouse. As civilians surged toward the landing pads, the Tyranids struck with renewed fury. Winged harpies screamed down from the skies, their biocannons tearing transports apart mid-ascent. Gargoyles swarmed through the upper spires, ripping evacuees from stairways. Guardsmen formed human walls, bayonets fixed, buying time with their bodies. Captain Jorel, who had orchestrated the retreats weeks before, stood at Pad 7. His armor was scorched, his voice gone from shouting, but he refused to board. Instead, he directed squads into position, his hand steady on the hilt of his chainsword. When his troops begged him to flee, he only smiled grimly. Someone has to be the wall. Today, it is me. Still with us as the tension builds? Subscribe to witness more tales from the dark millennium. And so the bastion became a tomb. Each pad burned, each corridor drowned in ichor, each guardsman falling in a storm of claws. Dropships roared into the skies, but for every one that escaped, 3 more were torn apart. The Hive Fleet closed its jaws. Corellian's defenders did not surrender, but survival was no longer their duty. Their duty was to buy time.
The end was not sudden. It was slow, methodical, the inevitable conclusion of the swarm's hunger. Corellian's spires, once defiant against the choking sky, toppled one by one. Great towers crumbled into digestion pools, their sacred stone reduced to steaming slurry. The macro cannons fell silent as their crews were torn apart or dragged beneath the flesh tides. The Vox networks, once alive with desperate commands and the roar of artillery, fell quiet. Silence spread, broken only by the alien chorus of the swarm feasting. A handful of dropships had broken through, carrying civilians, wounded guardsmen, and fragments of command staff. In orbit, Navy frigates burned themselves out defending those transports. Each lost vessel, another flare extinguished in the void. Some of those who escaped looked back through viewports, watching their world dissolve into an alien nightmare. None spoke. There was no language sufficient to describe what they saw. On the surface, the Bastion's final defenders sold their lives dearly. Captain Joral's last stand became legend. Surrounded on all sides by Tyranid warriors, his chainsword roared until it sputtered dry. His final act was to hurl a primed crack grenade into the maw of a conifex, vanishing in the blast. Commissar Renin fought until his bolt pistol clicked empty, then drew his power sword and spat curses into the swarm. Even as he was dragged down, his defiance echoed in the minds of those few who escaped. And then, nothing. The swarm did not revel in victory. It simply consumed. Once resistance had ended, the great digestion pools spread unchecked. Oceans boiled away. Forests were reduced to nutrient sludge. Mountains themselves were hollowed and stripped. Each scrap of biomass, human, animal, or plant, was drawn up through the capillary towers and funneled into the hive ships above. Days passed, then weeks, until nothing living remained. What had once been a thriving Imperial world, home to billions, became a barren husk of grey stone and lifeless dust. The bioships, gorged and swollen with the planet's essence, stirred and shifted. As if satisfied, the swarm turned its attention outward, tendrils of the hive mind already questing toward new prey among the stars. And in their wake, silence. A silence so complete that it seemed the planet had never been alive.
This is what happens when a hive fleet devours an entire planet. It is not a battle in the traditional sense. No ebb and flow of strategy, no chance of negotiation, no miracle of survival. It is a harvest, a single, unrelenting truth. When the Tyranids come, the world dies. The soldiers who stood against them did so knowing the truth. They did not fight for victory. They fought to delay the inevitable, to buy seconds that might allow a handful to escape. And in those seconds,
heroism was born. The names of Strauss, Renan, Jorel, and the countless guardsmen who stood beside them will echo in the Imperium's annals, though the soil they died upon no longer exists. To face the Tyranids is to confront hunger incarnate, a hunger that knows no fear, no exhaustion, no compromise. Entire sectors have burned to halt a single hive fleet, and even then the swarm adapts, endures, and presses onward. The galaxy is vast, but the Tyranids are patient. Somewhere in the void, their tendrils still drift, questing for the next world to strip bare. The Emperor protects. More stories await.